We were speaking of experiences in sadhana. We noted some are experiences from the spiritual sources, and some have evidently a vital character. Confining ourselves to those of the spiritual variety, any experience of this sort is not an end in itself. Each experience should act as a stimulus, an indicator, and one has to follow up the hints. Sri Aurobindo speaks of a sadhak who had the experience of the Golden Mother appearing in his meditation over his head, followed by a downpour of peace, strong peace. He remarks that this experience should have been followed up by taking steps for purification of the being in order that the peace could settle itself. But the man did nothing of the kind. Obviously, he was satisfied with that experience, and he relaxed, with the result that he lost that experience and he remained what he was. Sri Aurobindo recalls this incident to emphasize that an experience needs to be followed up in an appropriate manner. We do not do meditation or sadhana to get an experience. Experience, visual or auditory, may or may not come. What is important is a building up of a state of peace, calm, equality. This brings us to another essential step in spiritual ascension of consciousness. When we meditate, we are supposed to be focused on our high aspiration, leaving aside, at least for the time, other interests. But this presupposes a discipline, a sustained effort to keep ourselves aloof from constant involvement in the movement of life. Life has to be lived, and yet something of us must be aloof. Sri Aurobindo attaches great importance to the discipline of separating the Purusha from the Prakriti. Most of us are not aware of the Purusha aspect of our being at all. We are creatures of Prakriti, driven by Prakriti. And to become aware that we are the Purusha also requires a certain culture, spiritual culture, a mental enlightenment, and a capacity to separate ourselves from the movements of nature. It is not enough to do this during meditational hours. This is something which has to be practiced all through, doing what we have to do, but always aware somewhere in our being that I am separate. I am the Purusha. This is the movement of Prakriti. This habitual practice leads to a separation, a demarcation between the poise of the Purusha and the activity of the Prakriti. It is only if this background is established firmly that it becomes effective, spontaneously dynamic when we go into or sit for meditation. Let us assume that we have arrived at that point when our mind, our central consciousness is aloof, not running hither and thither, but turned upwards, receptive, open. And what happens normally is there is a quietude, a quiet which in due time develops into a calm, which is not disturbed. And that leads to peace, and that peace, as it spreads, as it deepens itself, results in a silence in the mind. As this operation continues, as peace becomes natural and silence becomes habitual, you begin to feel silent, detached, immutable. You recall to your mind at that time the description of the self, Atman, as something stable, immutable, permanent. And as this shadow of the Atman, shadow is not a happy word, the ray of this Atman falls on you, you begin to feel that this alone is true. All the rest all this movement is not true, is unreal. It looked real at one time, but not now. Truly, this stable, unchanging self with the breath of the eternal, that is the real. And all the rest is unreal. This is an experience which takes place on the threshold of the spiritual realm due to a reflection or action of what is called the static self. Static self. Everything else, movement, activity, convicts itself of a certain illusoriness, and the detached self alone gives the feeling of being real, permanent. Many yogis have deepened this particular experience till this experience has completely possessed them, and they have convinced themselves that that's the sole truth of existence and no other. And they have gone on to erect philosophies of illusionism, rejection of the world, sole reality of the detached self, and so on, what we may call negative philosophies. They become prisoners of the experience of the static self. Now, what is the static self? It can be experienced as a state of indescribable peace, bordering on delight, ananda, or when it is blissful, they say it is an experience or a realization of Brahman, or it leads to a certain emptiness. Emptiness, you empty yourself of all the contents of manifestation of the world, and you begin to feel that a void, a zero, a nihil is the ultimate truth. Nothing ever existed. Somehow you got into a movement of existence, and you sink into the realization of nothing. It is nirvana. That's the Buddhist position. Should you, however, wait in calm and patience and faith without allowing yourself to be completely overpowered by this realization of solitary, total aloofness, you feel slowly a movement of the dynamic self. Light, knowledge, power, they begin to descend on you. You know that they are descending from above, and a new world opens. This is exactly what happened to Sri Aurobindo. After he had the realization of the silent Brahman or the nirvanic experience at the instance of Lele, he did not allow himself to be completely possessed by this experience, because there was something in him which told him this is not the final thing. There is something else. There is something more. And he waited. And he describes how slowly new horizons, new dimensions opened up. And there were ingressions of light, power, knowledge, a dynamic peace, not static. When this happens, it is an indication that you have begun to receive the higher consciousness above the mind. The mind has been overpassed, but above the mind, you enter or you are possessed by a different type of consciousness. Our mind divides, is divisive, ascertains things one by one. But in the spiritual realm, you become aware of the workings of another consciousness. You see many things at the same time. You see a multiple number of objects without conflict. Here, at the mental level, if you take one, the other is other. It may be opposite, it may be neutral, or whatever it is. There is a difference. Here, without difference, you see in the same look many things, multiplicity. This is what is called the higher mind. The higher mind operates on a different principle, on a unitive principle and not divisive principle. You see many things at the same time, and there is a strong peace, a tranquil peace. That is the state of the higher mind. But still, thought is the medium. Thought is the instrument through which knowledge forms. But it is a thought which is different from mental thinking. It unites. Thought power continues with a different content, with a different nature. As you assimilate the workings of the higher mind, and you still aspire, you don't stay content, you don't stay put, but you aspire still further. The psychic flame shoots up. Another consciousness, another kind of mind begins to operate. There are flashes of light. They light up what you want to know. An object of knowledge You don't have to reason out, you don't have to get the data, but what you want to know, there is a flash of light, an inner light, and the knowledge flashes in you. If the higher mind can be described as a steady sunshine lighting up everything in its domain, this mind, what is called the illumined mind, can be called lightnings, a series of lightnings, a rain of lightnings with power. There it was peace. Here there is a tremendous power, vibrations. And there it was thought, here it is sight. Sight is the chosen instrument of the action of the illumined mind. Let us assume that we assimilate that, we allow the illumined mind to settle into ourselves, then you become aware of still another higher range where knowledge is spontaneous. There is no thought, there is no flash, but it arises. This is that, this is that. And it allows no doubt. It has its stamp of authenticity. This is what is called the intuitive mind. Intuition is a faculty of the higher consciousness, and it is what Sri Aurobindo describes, an edge of truth, a direct edge of truth. From the edge you can go to the truth. It is the sharp edge of truth. And this intuition runs into four streams. That is, it has four different lines of action. First is inspiration. You hear the truth. We have always heard of poets getting inspiration. Not necessarily the physical ear, though it can be that, but the inner ear hears, listens, and there is a certain recordation. Sri Aurobindo, and I believe there are others also, who have heard, and it is recorded in the consciousness, and the next morning they have written out the whole thing. So it is recorded. So inspiration, hearing of truth, that is one line. Second, seeing of truth, revelation. You see what is what. If the hearing of truth is described in our tradition as Saraswati, action of Saraswati, the movement of revelation is described as Ida, the goddess of revelation. Then there is the intuition of discrimination, spontaneous, automatic discrimination between the true and the false, the right and the wrong. You don't have to logically proceed to distinguish. A spontaneous action of intuitive discrimination. It is called the action of dakshina. Dakshina, cleverness. segmentation, a very clever segmentation between the truth and the false. This is the third. Fourth is the intuition of sense, touch, and you know what is that. You want to take so many, say, 10 flower petals. So if I put my fingers, exactly the 10 will come. This is called the intuition in the sense, intuition of touch. This is the still higher grade of intuitive consciousness. Still higher, should we be fortunate enough to push that far, is the overmind, the cosmic mind, where you see the whole universal setup at one look. A unitive, you see multiplicity, but you also see that behind there is a hold of unity, the one and the many, but the many held in the grasp of the one. This is called cosmic mind, cosmic consciousness, where you are identified with what you want to know, with what you want to experience. Identified with the universe, cosmos, spontaneously. But still, even this, at the over-mental or the cosmic mind level, there is multiplicity preponderating over unity. Unity is in the background. You know exactly what is what, why what is there, what is the truth of each philosophy, what is the truth of each position, all that you know. But the unifying principle is in the background. That is why it is said that even at the over-mental level, there is the shadow of ignorance. Over-mind is the highest peak, the highest level of this lower hemisphere of physical, vital and mental consciousness. Above the over-mind there is a lid, something like a lid, beyond which there is the higher hemisphere, beginning with the vijnana or the supramental or the supermind. A fissure, an opening has to be made in that lid above the head. There has to be an action of ascent, aspiration, seconded by a powerful descent from above. The joint action of the ascent and the descent splits open the lid, and there is a downpour of this highest truth consciousness. And you reach the supermind, the supramental consciousness, where the one is predominant. The multiplicity is there, but is always an expression of the one which dominates everything. That is why it is called the truth consciousness. This is roughly the graph of the course taken by our being in the course of its ascension towards the highest. A series of heights or ranges of consciousness leading to the supramental consciousness, which we have discussed at length while studying Life Divine, which alone can affect the spiritual transformation. Till then, we have a series of spiritual realizations. There is not one realization of which they speak in the Vedanta, but a number of realizations at different levels of consciousness. Ultimately, readying, preparing the being for the action of the transformative force of the supramental consciousness. That leads us to the other field of supramental transformation. We have studied psychic transformation. We have cast a look at spiritual transformation. And the culmination is spiritual and supramental transformation. What begins as a spiritual realization reaches its culmination in the supramental transformation. In what way is realization different from transformation? What are the changes affected by transformation which are not normally possible by realization? These are certain points that we will take up for discussion in our next meeting.